what is out there, beyond our world. Today's episode covers the technological and social niceties of tomorrow. An electronic computer that can fit on a desk, act as a super telephone, and be powerful enough to open a portal to an entirely new world. The cyber world. But with these ultra-modern luxuries comes a hefty price. Bad actors, whether it be communists, beat poets, or rock and roll performers, have used these domains to take advantage of the vulnerable, the feeble, and the innocent, with something called the computer virus. And now, these perpetrators can take down dozens of entire systems in seconds, with just a few lines of code, and by preying on the motivations and ambitions of everyday individuals like you and me. Just like its very nature, computer viruses are an epidemic, spreading faster than they can be contained, and contaminating the once idealized structure of the World Wide Web. But what about the more unnerving ones which showed up at the beginning of this global interconnectivity? Ones which not only feed on our biggest fears, but claim to be so powerful that their very existence is subject to scrutiny. These are the questions that can only be answered by dialing into a realm beyond our world.
The exponentially growing power of computers and the digital superhighway only reinforced the capabilities of these nefarious programs. It was like something out of science fiction, a manifestation of our biggest fears, even a bit of digital mind control. In 2001, a computer worm began to surface the World Wide Web that exploited a vulnerability within Microsoft's IIS web servers, which allowed them to forcibly alter someone's digital footprint. This would become known as CodeRed. The virus was first discovered by Mark Mayfret and Ryan Perme of EI Digital Security, who gave it that name because they were drinking Mountain Dew CodeRed at the time. However, its true origins and those responsible for its creation are still unknown to this day. This Microsoft vulnerability was discovered by Riley Hassel and was known as something called a buffer overflow. This is basically when a user puts more data inside of a memory slot than it is allocated to handle, which can cause some things to get all messed up. Think of it like pouring a gallon of water into a small cup. It's just going to keep pouring over and spilling out all over the place and affecting the things around it. The data that it would stuff into this buffer was this long string of text, which would then allow for the overflow to occur and for the worm to execute its payload. Now, all this change to the data only occurred within the memory, meaning no data was changed permanently. But still, it was able to wreak havoc for a good amount of time. This included code that would trigger DDoS attacks against the targeted servers, meaning that they sent so much fake traffic to them that it would overload them and make them unusable. This payload also included HTML code that would temporarily change the appearance of websites that were targeted, with the most popular example being whitehouse.gov. And on top of all this, it would then spread to other machines that also used Microsoft IIS web servers, which is how it got around rather quickly. After just a week, the virus had infected over 350,000 computers running Windows NT and Windows 2000. What was particularly innovative about the CodeRed virus was that it ran completely inside the machine's memory, like we just mentioned. This meant that it wasn't detectable on a system's hard drive, making it much more difficult to locate through traditional antivirus scanning. Interestingly, it did all of this on a fixed schedule, until it would remain dormant for the last couple days of the month, before starting all over again the next. Variants of the worm continued to pop up towards the end of 2001, many of which further took advantage of this vulnerability while creating even more dangerous payloads that added backdoors to crucial systems. CodeRed was mostly contained once Microsoft went in and patched this exploit. Awareness for the malware grew, and its efficiency went down with each passing month. CodeRed serves as a bit of a cautionary tale to not underestimate the issues in a program's code that may appear minute. Even the smallest problems, with very simple explanations, can give remarkably strong power to those who take advantage of them. This next virus is particularly fascinating just because of how many seemingly random places it infiltrated. Additionally, it had a much longer life than most malware typically does. This virus would surface in 1999 and was known as FunLove. Despite coverage of it being pretty much everywhere in computer circles, very little first-hand documentation of FunLove has survived. Not even a whole lot of pictures of it. As far as I can tell, it is completely lost media. But I will show some recreations of what it most likely would have looked like. Much like CodeRed, the developer behind this worm has also never been identified, but it takes advantage of vulnerabilities found in certain file types on Windows 9X and NT systems. Any files with the extensions of .exe, SER, or OCX will be infected with the words fun-loving criminal, which was the name of a rock band at the time. This name would be displayed if the program ran in DOS mode, which you could have guessed was rather common for a lot of programs during the Y2K era. The virus would then add a file called flcss.exe into the machine system directory. This file was programmed to reactivate the worm automatically upon reboot and spread to any other local drives or machines that were on the same network. FunLove was initially discovered in November of 1999 and spread through the US, the UK, and the Czech Republic. But it arguably would gain the most public attention when it would end up on a particular home video release of the Powerpuff Girls in 2001, which was quickly recalled. Yes, Warner Brothers unknowingly sold a disc that had the FunLove virus on it. So, anyone who wanted to watch this particular edition of the Powerpuff Girls back in 2001 had their computers infected when they put the DVD inside. It's likely that the producer or distributor of these DVDs had their systems infected with the virus as well, which is what caused it to show up on these discs. The wide distribution of this home video and, of course, the continued reliance of Windows 9X systems, as well as DOS programs throughout the early 2000s, helped add to its prolonged presence in all kinds of work and home settings that used computer networks. Ironically, it also accidentally spread through a security update that Microsoft released the same year. Unlike the CodeRed worm, FunLove was detectable on hard drives, which thankfully made it a bit easier for standard antivirus programs to detect it and properly quarantine it. However, its ability to tamper with critical system files, this reliance on legacy Windows software like we just discussed, its relatively public spreading through commercial media, and the slow adaptation to these antivirus updates allowed it to remain active for almost 2 years. Prior to these antivirus updates, the most effective way of combating this worm was by booting the machine in Windows recovery mode and removing it from there. Nonetheless, the execution of the FunLove worm really highlights the importance of being alert and quick to fighting digital threats. This next one is probably one of the most terrifying forms of malware that I've seen from this era, or even just in general, simply due to its sheer level of capability and destruction. It was known as Chernobyl, or CIH, which was the initials of its creator. It first appeared in 1998 and infected over 60 million machines and caused around $1 billion in damage. What made it so unnerving is that it was one of the few viruses that could infect the computer's BIOS. This is incredibly rare nowadays, and you could argue that the Chernobyl worm was what brought awareness to it as a big issue. It was nicknamed this because the worm was programmed to activate on April 26, 1999, which was the 13th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster. This also means that the virus remained dormant on a lot of machines for almost an entire year. It initially spread through illegally downloaded software or bootlegged CDs that had the malware surreptitiously installed on it. One of the most notable infected programs at this time was a demo version of the video game Sin. And once this virus entered the victim's machine, it would infect any executable files that were present on the system. So, people who would regularly share their executable files with other people were unknowingly also spreading the virus to them. This, combined with the fact that certain software updates and even entire brands of PCs shipped with the virus on them, allowed for it to spread so rapidly. Because it remained dormant for quite some time, many people were not even aware that they had it, until the payload finally activated. First, it would overwrite the data within the first megabyte of the system's hard drive. This would completely erase the partition table and make the computer unable to boot up, meaning that users could no longer access the personal files on their hard drive, since they no longer had an operating system to boot into. Then the payload would do something much worse. It would attempt to flash the computer's BIOS with destructive software. If successful, this meant that even the system on the motherboard was toast. So you couldn't even wipe the operating system and start over if you wanted to. You would have had to send the machine back to the manufacturer to have the motherboard system restored, which was very expensive back in the 90s. It's important to also note that at this time, the way BIOS configurations were set up on most PCs was much more uniform and homogenized than it is today. And of course, programs that provide firmware updates to a machine's BIOS need privileged access to the BIOS for those updates to even take place. The Chernobyl virus was cunning enough to essentially trick the computer into thinking it was a firmware update, and therefore give it this special access. Now granted, a big part of this was the fact that the worm only affected Windows 9X operating systems, which were a lot more lax on BIOS security compared to NT-based systems. So, computers that ran Windows 9X, which was most of them in the 90s, and also had this specific BIOS setup that was susceptible to the virus, were in great danger. But in other words, it didn't destroy every single machine that it infected, but it destroyed enough of them to create devastating results. Now that BIOS systems have become much more diverse and secure since then, with most machines switching to UEFI systems, things like the Chernobyl virus have become much less threatening, and BIOS malware is pretty much a non-issue for this exact reason. The closest thing we've had in recent time was the CrowdStrike outage in July of 2024. Now, this was accidental, it was not malware, but a faulty update to the CrowdStrike software caused huge disruption because of the privileged access it had to critical parts of the machine. Was it the BIOS? No, but it was still granted more permissions than what is normal for software to have, which can have massive problems if things go south. But the scares and paranoia surrounding BIOS malware is still very much with us, to the point where we start to enter the realm of viruses that are more, admittedly, in tinfoil hat territory. This next virus we'll be talking about is technically just an urban legend because it has never been confirmed to exist in an uncontrolled public setting. Word of it began to surface online in 2013, but some witness accounts of it date as far back as 2010. This is a mysterious computer virus known simply as BadBIOS, a virus that supposedly spreads through sound. Now, this is a very controversial subject that has tech enthusiasts on both sides of the aisle just clawing at each other. One side thinks that the concept is so ridiculous to even take seriously, while the other side swears on their life that this virus is real and that they have witnessed it themselves. It all started when a tech researcher named Dragos Roya claimed that the CD drive on his MacBook suddenly stopped working after he installed a fresh copy of macOS 10. He then noticed that his system configurations kept changing and even undoing themselves, and these problems persisted no matter what he did. Even after completely wiping his hard drive multiple times and even disconnecting his laptop from the internet, the problem was still there. The issue then started to pop up on other computers in his proximity that not only used different operating systems, but were never even connected to the internet before this all started. He also had been complaining about hearing a faint but high-pitched buzzing sound in his lab for the past 3 years, and that's when he started to put it all together. According to him, this was all the result of a virus that resided in the BIOS and spread to other machines using ultrasonic frequencies from the speakers that would then be picked up by the nearby computer's microphones. He, of course, gave it the name BadBIOS. Now, I've already done an entire video about the BadBIOS story, which ended up being quite polarizing, so I will keep things short here. One of the first things that people pointed out in my video that I humorously didn't even think about is Dragos' claim about the CD drive on his MacBook not working. Dragos had a MacBook Air, which famously do not have CD drives. A lot of people felt that this was a big hole in his story. Now, in fairness, he could have been using one of those portable CD drive adapters that you connect through USB to test this out. I mean, those do exist. But even then, one of the main counter-arguments to this whole story was surrounding the method of communication. Even if we put aside the inevitable interference of background noise and how much more secure BIOS and UEFI systems have become, like we just discussed earlier, transmitting data through computer speakers just isn't very practical. Now, transmitting electrical signals through sound to technologically communicate over a long distance is not a new concept. Heck, this is how 90s dial-up internet worked. It's how the telegraph worked in the 1800s. But you still need someone or something to decode the message. If I send Morse code through a telegraph and no one is on the other end to translate my message, then it doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of random noise. The message doesn't actually come through until this decoding occurs. This is what a modem does in the context of dial-up internet. The only way for these computers to somehow get this virus through a machine's speakers would be if it already had a digital decoder programmed inside of it, particularly the BIOS. And this just isn't a thing on any computer. But the weird thing is that these claims come from people with tech backgrounds and credentials that you could say are credible, which further adds to the mystery. And so, BadBIOS has continued to be a contentious topic among tech circles even today. And whatever the truth is, it's out there. Now, this last one is definitely one of the most interesting computer virus cases I've come across. Even though it was technically accidental, it still meets the definition of a virus by every sense of the word, and has even been cited in multiple academic journals as a case study on human behavior. On September 13th, 2005, online users playing World of Warcraft were confronted with something that would soon be known as the Corrupted Blood Incident. Now, I played very little World of Warcraft back in the day, so bear with me if I mess up some of the lore, but the developers of the game added a raid boss named Hikar the Soulflayer in the temple city of Zul'Gurub. And this character could cast a spell that would kill most players, except for the ones at a very high level. And this spell could spread to other nearby players. Seems like your typical final boss battle with an exceptionally challenging component to it. But there was a crucial detail that developers forgot to consider. This spell was only meant to work within this specific region of the game, but it actually ended up working within the entire world map, particularly because the plague was unknowingly carried by the players' pets. So when these endgame players returned to the general population, they were bringing the disease with them. Suddenly, scores of players were just dropping dead left and right, mostly low-level users. The high-level players that would survive would just become carriers of the disease, infecting anyone nearby. To make matters worse, certain NPCs within the game that are specifically designed to give out quests could also contract the disease without dying, making them asymptomatic carriers. So people were further interacting with characters without knowing that they were infected. it even began spreading to other servers, and so panic ensued. This was an issue that persisted within World of Warcraft for almost a month. Players and even Blizzard Entertainment themselves had to take precautions to mitigate the disease's spread. This included players taking on the caregiving role of helping those who were sick, people intentionally staying distant from each other so that they wouldn't contract the illness, and even those going around infecting others as a joke to cause mass hysteria. Blizzard unknowingly created a very realistic simulation of how a global pandemic usually unfolds. It almost always starts with the infection of an animal, which then spreads out to the general population. Certain people can be asymptomatic when contracting it, and these players behaved the way many people typically do during a pandemic. Thankfully, this was just in a video game, and was something that could eventually be fixed with some updates. But its controlled, computerized environment has allowed academics to study it as a social phenomenon that can help us better understand and manage the outcomes of real-life global pandemics. Despite it being just a developer oversight, if this isn't the most literal definition of a computer virus, then I don't know what is. Seeing all this chaos that is plaguing World of Warcraft today is certainly one for the books. Too bad the developers over at Blizzard were unable to act in time to prevent it. But don't fret. Expert programmers say that there is a way out of this conundrum. All it takes is a little bit of technical know-how. Today on Cyber Chronicles, we will be talking about the brilliant minds behind it. In fact, that is what they call themselves, Brilliant. They are an application that uses the power of portable technology and the World Wide Web to make learning an easy, fun task that can be done anywhere. Whether you're learning something that's brand new to you or just want to get better at your craft, Brilliant lets you level up at your own pace and on your own time. Brilliant allows you to build your critical thinking skills through problem solving. As my teacher always said, memorizing is just one ear in, out the other. Especially when you are dealing with the complexities of programming. But Brilliant allows you to actually apply what you've learned so that it sticks with you and successfully becomes a valuable skill set. Their collection ranges from Python programming to developing intuitions for computer logic. You'll be programming so much you'll be dreaming about it. And now you can learn for free on Brilliant today. Go to brilliant.org/nationsquid or scan the QR code to get 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to all Brilliant content. And you can start fighting these cyber plagues one click at a time. If you'd like to learn more about computer viruses in greater detail, I have included a playlist below, and you can also find some right here. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Check out patreon.com/nationsquid for exclusive content, and feel free to buy me a copy as well if you're feeling extra generous. Thank you for watching, everyone.